The dress was hanging on the back of the door when my sister walked in without knocking. That was always her way. 14 years older than me, she'd never once knocked. Not when I was 16 and crying over a failed math test. Not when I was 22 and studying for the bar. Not today, when I was 31 years old and standing in my slip in the bridal suite of the Fairmont Hotel in Chicago, 40 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. She looked at me. Then she looked at the dress. Then she laughed. Not a small laugh. Not a surprised laugh. The kind of laugh you use when you want someone to feel it. "You are actually wearing that," she said. It wasn't a question. The dress was cream, not white. Cap sleeves. Simple. I bought it off the rack at a boutique in Lincoln Park because I'd had exactly one Saturday free in the past 8 months, and that was the Saturday I happened to walk past that window. I liked it the moment I saw it. It fit me like it had been made for me. I didn't need anything more complicated than that. My sister apparently did. "It looks like something you'd wear to a courthouse," she said, walking past me to pour herself a glass of water from the pitcher on the vanity. Which I guess makes sense, considering that word had been following me around for years. Considering what you do for a living. Considering how much you work. Considering that you chose that over a family. I was a federal prosecutor. I had been since I was 26. I'd spent the last 5 years in the Northern District of Illinois working financial fraud cases, the kind that took 18 months to build and another year to try, and most people never heard about unless they happened to read the business section on a slow news day. I was good at it. I was, if I'm being honest, very good at it. But in my family, being good at something that required you to be unavailable for holidays and birthday dinners and cousins' graduation parties was not considered a virtue. My sister had 3 kids, a husband who coached Little League, and a house in Naperville with a finished basement. She'd never once asked me what I actually did at work. In 10 years, she had never once asked. "I think it's beautiful," said my maid of honor, Cassandra, from the corner of the room where she'd been pretending to fix her mascara while my sister held court. My sister glanced at her the way you glance at someone who has just said something both predictable and irrelevant. "Of course you do," she said. She set down her water glass, straightened her own dress, deep burgundy, mother of the bride energy despite being neither, and looked at me one more time. "Mom's going to say something too," she said. "I'm just warning you." She left. She didn't close the door behind her. I need to back up, because none of this started in that hotel room. It started, really, the day I told my family I'd gotten into Northwestern law. I was 21. I thought they would be proud of me. My father was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's a long road, Vivienne." My mother hugged me and said, "Just make sure you leave room for the rest of your life." My sister, who was 35 and already had 2 kids by then, said, "Law school? God, why would you do that to yourself?" Nobody said congratulations. I told myself it was because they were practical people who worried about me. I told myself that for a long time. It was easier than the alternative. The alternative was that they had already decided what kind of person I was. The difficult one, the intense one, the one who always had to do things the hard way, and no amount of achievement was going to change that frame. The frame was the thing. Everything I did got filtered through it. When I graduated top 10% of my class, my mother said, "Now you just have to find someone patient enough to handle your schedule." When I landed the U.S. Attorney's Office position, my father said, "Hope they pay you what you're worth." Government jobs. When I prosecuted my first major case, a wire fraud scheme that had stolen retirement savings from over 400 families, my sister said she'd heard about it on the news and that it seemed stressful. 400 families. 3 years of my life. 12-hour days, missed holidays, a relationship that ended partly because I kept canceling dinner to prep witnesses, and it seemed stressful. I stopped trying to explain my work to them sometime around year 3. Not dramatically, not with a speech. I just quietly stopped bringing it up, the way you stop trying to describe a color to someone who's been telling you they can see it when they clearly can't. His name was Owen. He taught high school history in Evanston, coached the junior varsity soccer team, and made the best breakfast burritos I've ever eaten in my life. We met at a friend's housewarming party. He was standing in the corner reading the host's bookshelf titles, which I thought was either the nerdiest or most charming thing I'd ever seen, and I hadn't decided which when he turned around and asked if I'd read the one in the middle. I hadn't. He hadn't either. We talked about it anyway. He proposed at Navy Pier, which sounds more romantic in retrospect than it felt in the moment. It was February, we were freezing, he dropped the ring box twice, but I cried anyway and said yes before he'd finished the sentence. When I called my mother to tell her, she said, "Tell me he's not in academia." I told her he was a teacher. Long pause. "Well," she said, "he must be wonderful if you love him." The "if" was doing a lot of work in that sentence. My family had opinions about the wedding. They had opinions about everything, but the wedding was a particular opportunity. Too simple, not enough people invited. The venue was nice, but not what I pictured. And at some point my sister informed me that Cassandra's bridesmaid dress was not a flattering color on her, but I guess that's your call. I stopped returning calls the week before the wedding. Not from everyone. From them. I know how that sounds. I know. But you have to understand something about what it is like to move through the world being quietly told over and over in 100 small ways that your choices are suspect and your life is a little bit sad and the things you've sacrificed were never worth it anyway. It accumulates. It doesn't feel like a crisis, it feels like weather. You just get used to being a little bit cold all the time. Owen knew. He never pushed me to reconcile with them or to write them off. He just said, one night about a month before the wedding, "Whatever you decide, I'm on your side." And then he made breakfast burritos at 11 o'clock at night, and we watched a documentary about competitive crossword puzzles, and I thought, this is the person I'm supposed to build a life with. This exact person. The ceremony was at 2 o'clock. By 1:45, Cassandra had fixed my lipstick twice. My flower girl, Owen's 7-year-old niece, had already lost one of her flower petals and was crying about it, and I was standing in the lobby of the Fairmont feeling, for the first time all day, genuinely calm. The hotel had arranged a small waiting area off the main corridor where I could stand without being seen. 2 of Owen's colleagues from school were ushering. His soccer kids had made a banner. There were about 120 people in that ballroom, which my mother had said was modest, and which I thought was exactly right. I was watching the door to the ballroom, waiting for my cue, when I heard footsteps behind me. My sister. And behind her, my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, who I genuinely loved and who had the misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. My sister looked at my dress again. Then she looked at my hair, which Cassandra had done simply, half up, with small pearl pins. Then she shook her head slightly, the way you shake your head at something that confirms what you already knew. "You should have let Mom help you plan this," she said. "It's not too late to at least put on some statement jewelry." "I don't want statement jewelry," I said. "Of course not," she said, "because that would require caring about what this looks like." My aunt made a small sound. Not quite a word, more like the beginning of an attempt to redirect. My sister wasn't done. "You done everything exactly the way you wanted your entire life," she said very quietly, with a kind of concentrated energy that was worse than yelling. "Your school, your job, your wedding. And every single time, the rest of us are just supposed to rearrange ourselves around whatever Vivienne has decided is important. Meanwhile, the dress looks like you bought it off a clearance rack." I didn't say anything. I had learned, a long time ago, that saying anything just gave her more material. "I just feel sorry for Owen," she said. "Marrying someone who treats her own wedding like a business meeting." She turned. She walked back toward the ballroom. My aunt touched my arm and said, "She doesn't mean it." Which was the kindest lie I'd heard all day, and we both knew it was a lie. The music started. I walked down the aisle to "A Thousand Years," which Owen had picked because he said it was the only romantic song he knew that didn't make him feel embarrassed, and I had said that was good enough for me. I saw him when I came through the doors. He was wearing a navy suit and his hair was doing the thing it does when he hasn't quite managed to get it to lie flat, and he was crying already before I'd taken 3 steps. I stopped almost crying immediately because one of us had to hold it together, and I had decided on the drive over that it was going to be me. We said our vows. Owen wrote his and didn't tell me what was in them. He talked about the bookshelf. He talked about February and frozen fingers and a dropped ring box. He said he had been looking for someone who was serious about things that mattered and that finding me felt like finding out the thing he'd been looking for had a name. I held it together right up until that last sentence. Then I didn't. "It's fine." Cassandra cried too. Owen's soccer kids cried. The flower girl cried because everyone else was crying and she wasn't entirely sure why. The reception was in the hotel ballroom. Owen's colleagues had organized a slideshow that he absolutely had not been told about, which included a photo of him at age 14 in a truly unfortunate soccer uniform, and the room lost it completely. I was standing at the edge of the dance floor talking to his department chair, a woman named Lorraine who had been teaching AP history for 30 years and had the energy of someone who had survived everything and found most of it funny. When I saw the door to the ballroom open, 3 people walked in, then 6, then 12. They were wearing suits, dark suits, some of them, and a few in what I recognized after a half-second of confusion as military dress uniforms. Not Marines, not all military. Some were in the dark jackets of federal law enforcement. Some were in suits I recognized as belonging to people I had worked with, investigators, paralegals, one of the agents from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit who had spent 18 months building the case with me. And then I saw, in the center of the group, the man I had not expected to see at my wedding, Judge Harold Whitmore. He was 71 years old, a federal judge in the Northern District for over 2 decades, a man who had presided over some of the most significant financial fraud cases in the district's history, and who, 3 months earlier, had presided over the sentencing in the case that had taken me 3 years to build. He had sent 4 defendants to federal prison, and it said, at sentencing, that the prosecution had been as thorough and as dogged as any I have seen in 23 years on this bench. He was also, it turned out, an old friend of Owen's father. I had not known this. Owen had mentioned his father knew someone in the legal world who'd asked to come. I had said, of course, the more the merrier. I had not asked follow-up questions because I had been managing 17 other things that week. The room noticed them coming in. My sister noticed. I watched her watch them from across the room. The suits, the dress uniforms, the quiet authority of people who move like they are used to rooms rearranging around them. And I watched the small furrow appear between her eyebrows. The group found their seats. Judge Whitmore caught my eye from across the room and gave a small nod, the kind of nod that doesn't require explanation. Then one of the FBI agents, a man named Carter, who had been on my case for 2 of its 3 years, and who I had spent more time with than some members of my own family, leaned over to the man next to him and said something. The man stood up. Then Carter stood up. Then, one by one, like a current moving through the room, the people at that table stood up. And then, because people notice when others stand, the tables around them noticed. Owen's colleagues stood. His soccer kids' parents stood. Lorraine, the AP history teacher who had survived everything, stood. Slowly, in the way that things happen when they are real rather than staged, the room stood. Not everyone at once, not dramatically. The way a wave actually moves, not a wall, but a rolling table by table, person by person, until the only people still seated in that ballroom were the ones who hadn't yet understood what was happening. And then one of the federal agents, I still don't know who started it, I've never been able to find out, started to clap. Not applause clapping. Not the kind you do at the end of a speech. The slow, deliberate, rhythmic kind that means something different. The kind that says, we see you. The kind that says, we know what this cost. My sister was seated at a table near the back. She did not stand. But I watched her watch everyone else stand, and I watched the moment she understood what she was looking at. Not a wedding reception for a woman with a clearance rack dress and a courthouse personality, but a room full of people who knew what I had actually built, and I watched something shift in her face. Not guilt, exactly, not quite, but something quieter than contempt. I don't know what to call it. I've thought about it since. The closest I can get is recognition. The recognition of someone who has been wrong about something for a very long time and has only just understood that the wrongness was the point. Judge Whitmore raised his glass. To Vivienne, he said, whose work I have had the privilege of watching, and to Owen, who clearly has the good sense and the courage to love someone who never once took the easy way. The room drank. Owen found my hand under the table. I did not look at my sister. I had spent a lot of years looking at my sister, waiting for something to change. I wasn't interested in looking at her anymore. She called me 2 days later. We were in Vermont for our honeymoon in a rental cabin with a porch that looked out over a lake that went completely still at sunrise. I was drinking coffee and watching a heron stand absolutely motionless at the water's edge when my phone buzzed. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message. I listened to it once. She said she hadn't realized. She said she hadn't realized. She said she thought I was exaggerating when I talked about my work. She said Judge Whitmore had come to talk to her after the dinner and that she hadn't known and that she was sorry if she'd made me feel like she didn't respect me. If she made me feel like she didn't respect me. I sat with that for a while. The heron didn't move. The lake didn't move. The coffee got cold. I texted her back. I said, I know you didn't know. I know you think you were just being honest. I think we need some time before we talk again and I'd like you to respect that. I hope you had a good time at the wedding. She didn't respond right away. When she did, 3 days later, it was one sentence. I hope we can figure this out. I read it on the drive home from Vermont. I put my phone in my bag and watched the highway unspool and thought about all the years I'd spent trying to make people understand something that was only ever going to be understood by people who already wanted to understand it. Owen was driving. He reached over and put his hand on mine without asking why, which is one of his best qualities. You okay? He said. Yeah, I said. I think I actually am. People ask me sometimes if I regret how the wedding went, if it was too dramatic, if I wish things were different with my family. Here's what I know. I did not plan what happened in that ballroom. I did not invite Judge Whitmore to make a point. I did not orchestrate the standing or the slow applause or any of it. What I did was spend 10 years doing difficult work as honestly as I could, and the people who witnessed that work decided on their own that it was worth acknowledging. I didn't get to control when or how that acknowledgement happened. I didn't get to make sure my sister wasn't in the room to see it. I didn't get to write the speech or choose the moment. But I was there. I was there in the dress I chose and the venue I chose and the life I'd built. The real one, not the one my family had decided I was living. And the people who knew that life were there too. I've thought sometimes about what my sister must have felt, sitting at that back table watching the room stand. I don't think it was a small thing to feel. I don't think it was easy. I'm not sure what to do with the fact that part of me wanted her to feel it. Not because I'm cruel, but because I had needed, for a very long time, for someone to finally see. She saw. I don't know yet what we're going to do with that. I don't know if we become something different or if we just become people who know the truth about each other and find some quieter way to exist in the same family. I think that might be the most I can hope for. I think that might be enough. What I know is this. I walked out of that hotel on my husband's arm, in my dress, in my life, with 120 people who loved us, some of whom had been in the room when I'd done the hardest work of my career, and some of whom were 7 years old and had cried because everyone else was crying, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, completely and precisely myself. Not the difficult one, not the intense one, not the one who always had to do things the hard way, just Vivienne. Just exactly that. Just enough. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in some abstract philosophical way, just the ordinary, unglamorous version of it that shows up in real life. The idea that what you put in, quietly and consistently and without an audience, has a way of showing up eventually. Not always on your timeline, not always in the way you expected, but it shows up. I spent 10 years building something. I didn't build it to prove a point to my sister. I built it because the work mattered. Because 400 families had lost their retirement savings to people who counted on nobody looking closely enough, and I looked closely. That's it. That's the whole story underneath the story. I did the work because the work was real and real things needed doing. My sister spent those same 10 years deciding she already knew who I was. That's her version of cause and effect. You stop being curious about someone, you stop seeing them. And eventually, you're sitting in a ballroom surrounded by strangers who know your sister better than you do, and the gap between what you assumed and what is true becomes visible to everyone in the room, including you. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because I think it's actually the most important lesson in all of this, and it has nothing to do with revenge. It has to do with the danger of certainty. The moment you decide you figured someone out, you stop paying attention. And life has a way of making that cost you. Owen saw me. Not the version of me that was convenient or familiar or easy to file away. He saw the actual person, the one who worked too hard and canceled dinners and cared deeply about things that didn't show up on any highlight reel. He chose to love that person on purpose, with full information. That's not luck. That's what happens when someone approaches another human being with genuine curiosity instead of inherited assumptions. Cassandra saw me too. She stood in that bridal suite and said, "I think it's beautiful," about a dress that nobody had asked her to defend, because she's the kind of person who pays attention and then tells the truth about what she sees. That's a rare thing. I don't take it for granted. And Judge Whitmore, 71 years old, no reason in the world to come to a federal prosecutor's wedding reception on a Saturday evening, stood up anyway, because he had watched the work. Because he knew what it cost. Because some people, when they witness integrity, feel compelled to acknowledge it. Not for the person who did the work, necessarily, but because acknowledgement is its own form of honesty. What I've learned is this: you don't get to control when your life becomes legible to the people who've been misreading it. You just have to keep living it accurately, keep doing the actual thing. Keep being the real version of yourself even when the room doesn't understand what they're looking at yet. The understanding comes when it comes. Sometimes it comes at your wedding. Sometimes it doesn't come at all. But the work still mattered. The choices still shaped you. The person you became is still real, regardless of who was paying attention. My sister said I treated my wedding like a business meeting. What she didn't understand is that I treated my life like something worth taking seriously. And the wedding was just one day of that life, dressed up a little, surrounded by people who knew the difference. That's enough. That will always be enough.